Hello there and welcome back to another review. So carrying on with cult movies, looking at more cult movies, and today we're going to be having a look at Legend, made in 1985. And 1985, it was just one of them years. There just seemed to be like movie gold that year. We had Back to the Future, Return of the Living Dead, Return to the Oz, we had The Goonies, and like I mentioned today, it's Ridley Scott's dark fantasy adventure that is Legend, starring a very, very, very young Tom Cruise, Tim Curry and Sara. Now, I'm not going to be looking at the director's cut here, as there are a few cuts of this movie. There's the theatrical cut, the European cut, all with very different endings, but I will just be looking at the movie sort of as I remember it, and the one I sort of grew up with, which is the European cut. That is just over 90 minutes, and the director's cut weighs in, I think, about 114 minutes. So, you know, what can you say about Legends? You know, it's one of them movies that I think a lot of people, especially me when I was growing up, it was one of them movies that I felt like I'd seen it even before I had seen it, if that makes sense. It's a very visual movie, and there's a lot, as I say, there's a lot to say about this movie. And I've usually lump it in with movies like Dark Crystal and Labyrinth. It's a lot darker than them two movies, though, a lot darker. Originally, this movie did not do well. It wasn't exactly hugely popular with critics, and was Ridley Scott's take on sort of the mystical fantasy movie, if a very dark one. But like with Blade Runner, this is a movie that has become more and more appreciated and more loved as the years have gone by. I mean, it's not like it was panned. It got an award for best cinematography and was nominated for many others for best makeup, best costume design, best visual effects. So it wasn't like it was totally ignored or anything like that. It wasn't like a huge disaster or anything like that, but a lot of people were not on board with this movie. I don't think fantasy films were necessarily like the thing to do at the time. The version I'm looking at as well is not the best version I'm looking at, but it's just the version I remember the most. Now, of course, I always remember this movie for the sheer terrifying nightmare and freakish appearance of Tim Curry as Darkness, which has to be one of the most badass stuff of nightmare villains you will ever see in movie history. You know, just the image of Tim Curry as this character is just, as I say, it's the stuff, you know, of absolute nightmares. I think it got voted or is named one of the most iconic character designs in all of fantasy cinema or something like that, such as the impact of how Tim Curry looks. You know, Tim Curry, whether here or as Pennywise from It, he can just play terrifying so well. I think he was even he was considered for the role as Judge Doom as well in Who Framed Roger Rabbit, but the producers and Robert Zemeckis were like, no, you're too terrifying. Like, that's why Tim Curry wasn't cast, and they went for Christopher Lloyd instead. You know, whether here, I mean, you know, of course, most famous for being in movies like Rocky Horror and Home Alone, but one of my most personal favourites talking about Tim Curry, one of my favourite movies with him in is Clue. Not sure if any of you out there know that movie, but super funny film. So I think with this movie, Scott just read all the classic fairy tales and obviously wanted to satisfy his director's itch to do a fantasy movie. So he wanted swords, he wanted unicorns, he wanted a quest. William Schwartzberg, who was a novelist who helped Scott with the script, I think they went through around 15 script revisions. So I think their ambition sort of far exceeded their realistic filmmaking goals in terms of what was possible and within their budget and their means. And again, you know, when you talk about casting choices, isn't it weird that like Johnny Depp was considered for this movie? I think even Jim Carrey was considered as well. Robert Downey Jr. was considered for the role of Jack. I mean, can you imagine? Can you imagine what it would have been like with any of them guys in it? I mean, you have to hand it to Scott. He'd done Blade Runner and Alien at this point, so this may not have been the kind of movie you would have necessarily expected from him to do, but so good at the set designs, the world and the environment and the setting, you just immerse yourself in Legend. It's a straight movie. There's not necessarily a lot of comic relief in the movie. It's like, I know I mentioned I sort of lump it together sometimes with movies like Labyrinth and things like that, but this is a much darker movie, a real much straighter, darker movie. As I say, it's just, even watching it for the first time, it's one of them movies that I could have sworn I'd seen, even though I hadn't. sort of seen it at that point, but it was like, because of the imagery, it all seemed familiar. But I think that plays into like the idea of like fairy tales and maybe stories you read, and things like that. And as a child watching it, you sort of, have I seen this, or is that, and all these things sort of become one. And there's a very bizarre familiarity to this movie. The whole film doesn't deviate too much, not a lot of subplots going on, or loads of characters to keep up with. But I like kids movies like this and Return to Oz back in the day, when filmmakers had balls basically, and were not afraid to give like kids a dark film. We're not afraid to sort of scare kids. And as a kid, and now it sounds really weird, but you like to be frightened, you like to watch scary. Well, I did, especially like say Return to Oz as a kid. Just loved it, absolutely loved it. I mean, Legend, it wasn't one of them movies as a kid that I absolutely loved, but when I did see it when I was young, and times I did watch it if it was on TV or whatever, I was just like totally enthralled, right? I was just totally and utterly gone. But I say back then, filmmakers had balls and were not afraid to scare the living crap out of kids. Like I say, it didn't do well. Many even said it was because of Legend, how poorly it was received, that Hollywood stopped making sort of, fantasy movies. But people absolutely adore Legend now. Like, this film is absolutely beloved. People absolutely love this movie. As I say, a few cuts to this version. I'm basing the review on I'm probably basing this review with the version I watch. I'm probably basing it on the most inferior version of Legend that there is. But hey, what can you do? So the Lord of Darkness wants no more sun and not another dawn. We meet Blix the Goblin, who tells him that he feels like a presence and a power in the forest, and Darkness wants him to go and sort it out, basically. I mean, you can't get more of a villain than Darkness, right? Just the name alone. What's the villain's name? Oh, he's just Darkness. That's bad enough. So he wants him to go and sort it out. We meet Princess Lily, who says to her friend now that she likes visiting her. Then we meet Tom Cruise's Jack, having his teeth done. Tom Cruise, I might add. The whole movie to me sometimes always felt like less like a sword and sorcery fantasy epic, and more like a Zelda movie. It feels it's got a bit of Zelda DNA in there, not completely, but you know what I mean, like Zelda-esque elements going on. So Jack can sort of talk to animals. As I say, whether you like the movie or not is all subjective, but you really do have to appreciate the sets in the movie. And yes, you can see they are sets, but you get used to them. And after a while, when the film sort of takes in, because of the sets and sort of this world that Ridley Scott invites you in, you just get involved. You just be it takes on a life of its own, which I absolutely love. The lighting, the atmosphere, all work. When the wind starts blowing with the sets, etc., it all adds to the production. So Jack shows her some unicorns. He is like a forest man, by the way. That's all. He's just a forest man. That's all we really get. Just lives amongst the trees and the animals, as you do. He tells her that as long as the unicorns are there, evil can never harm the pure of heart. And it's got them kind of lines going on. The pure of heart, and evil cannot come in here because we've got some unicorns. So the princess, she sort of approaches them and starts singing, as you do, just as this goblin uses his blow dart to hit the unicorn. This is definitely not as kid-friendly of a fantasy film as, say, like The Never-Ending Story, or as I mentioned, like Labyrinth or anything like that. There really isn't much in the way of comic relief, as I mentioned. The whole film, for the most part, is played very serious, very straight, which I think adds to its menacing tone, adds to its the whole darkness character as someone you really like. The villain with Tim Curry. This is someone you really don't want to mess with. This isn't like The Goblin King with David Bowie or anything like that. This is Darkness, right? This is one mean dude you do not want to get involved with. So after they run off, she starts singing to Jack now. Never mind about the unicorns, she just starts singing. Jack dives after a ring she throws away, saying she'll marry whoever finds it. Now, this is where the film goes super trippy. Jack gets trapped under the ice, massive storm breaks out, and the goblin cuts off the unicorn's horn. As I say, if anything else with this movie, the atmosphere definitely works. So the world gets turned to ice. The princess blames herself as she was the one who distracted the unicorns, and she hears Blix and his buddies talking. Jack gets woken up and meets Honeythorn Gump, who's like the guardian of the forest. Remember, Jack is like a forest child, okay? Not sure what that means exactly, but, he's just, like I mentioned, he's just sort of one with the forest. He understands animals, he climbs trees, but we'll just go with that. So Gump is super PO'd that the princess touched the unicorn. Jack has to solve a riddle in order for Gump to forgive him, and then naturally they do what anyone would do when your world is in peril. They just sit down and have some wine. As you do, fate of the world, resting on your shoulders, let's just have some wine. The film maybe, I think, isn't as grand as it was originally intended. I'd imagine probably in Ridley Scott's original vision it was going to have a lot more scope and a lot more epicness to it. But as I mentioned, films like budget constraints, limitations, script revisions, that kind of thing, he had to cater to that. But I'd imagine initially it would kind of be, but it's quite more of an epic, sprawling film. But it's actually quite an intimate movie. It's quite a close quarters film. So they go searching in the meantime. Like the princess at this point is just running around, all lost and confused. Jack finds the downed unicorn and apologises to the other one. The film really could have benefited from I think it could have benefited from a few comedy moments here and there, just to lighten the tone a little bit. But then I think that may have defeated the whole purpose of Legend. I mean, make no mistake, this is a dark fantasy movie. This is a very dark fantasy movie. So Jack learns they are cursed and will stay in darkness and must get the alicorn bat that got cut off from the unicorn, and the Gump goes to get some weapons. So Una the fairy turns she turns up and leads into this cave full of weapons and armour, and then she turns into human form and says, I can be anything you want me to be. Okay, I don't want to read too much into that, but I have to love how one of the goblins blunder says the word shit at one stage as well. The stallion is dead, but the mare is still alive, and darkness wants them both dead, so they come back to get it. Lily warns Brown Tom, who was a dwarf, and he uses this frying pan to deflect some arrows from the goblins. And I love how it says, I think one of his phrases that he says is duck. Dick a Tuesday's duck or something along them lines is one of his expressions when he's and then he gets an arrow in his hat. So Jack and Gump follow the tracks of the goblins, thinking they have taken the princess. We then meet Meg the Swamp Hag, and I tell you here now, Swamp Hag, much like Darkness, is the stuff right out of your worst nightmares, right? This is because where Tim Curry's performance is it sort of steals the show. You sometimes forget about the Swamp Hag if you're going to watch this movie, but this, as I say, this is the worst stuff of your worst nightmares. Sure, there are many sleepless nights back in the day for a lot of children when they first saw this. Meg is visually something more akin to something out of The Evil Dead, as opposed to sort of a kids' fantasy movie. I'd imagine if the Blair Witch ever had a form, if you ever saw what the Blair Witch actually looked like, I don't think she would be far off what Meg the Swamp Hag looks like. So Jack, just decapitates her, just cuts her head off. Can't beat a good decapitation for good measure. So they fall into a dungeon and meet Blunder, who is a dwarf training to be a goblin. This moment here with the imagery, the fire, the devilish laughing and the music, it really is like hell on earth. Una reveals herself human form and wants Jack to kiss her, and he sees her as Lily. He realises it's just fairy magic, and Una grabs the key and they escape. And you have to love how Brown, Tom and Screwball didn't want to split up, part of Jack's team. And Jack is right, Gump with me, you two are on your own. You're right, so you've got the two people who are sort of leaders, who sort of know what they're doing, are sort of in control and are not crapping their pants. They're well, we're off together. You two can, because they got to split up, and they put the two that really don't want to be there, they pair them off together for some reason. You think Jack or Gump would have stayed with one of them, it would have been the other way around. But anyway, the Jack and the Gump, they sort of team up that's just how it is. So the two people that are sort of leaders and in control, they sort of stick together, nice. So Darkness speaks to his father and is told to charm the princess so he can corrupt her and woo her, lay on his darkness charm, so to speak, work his magic. So she is just randomly roaming the castle. She does do a lot of sort of running around clueless, wherever she's going. And comes across this dining room and finds some jewellery, and then she's in a trance as this masked figure sort of dances in front of her. And again, really trippy stuff, really trippy. It's the kind of film where it's if you're going to have hallucinogenics or anything like that, you probably might have a lot of fun with this movie, but it's again really trippy, and randomly becomes becomes the figure as well, and becomes this dark version of her. Well, let's say the goth version of herself. Then Darkness appears, and it really is only in the last 20 minutes that you get the most screen time from Darkness. And like I say, I'm not going to go to gush about it too much, but what can you say about the design? As I say, it's just so terrifying and so awesome at the same time. Really great stuff. So Jack and Gump listen in as the last unicorn isn't dead yet, and they think as long as the sun still shines, they can destroy him. The mayor is still alive, they learn, and Jack's plan is to gather every shiny object that they can, to defeat darkness. They grab loads of metal plates and platters and free blunder from a pie as he's going to be cooked. So Lily says to Darkness that I will stay with you as long as it is me that gets to kill the unicorn. So you think, oh, okay, thanks a lot. Thank you very much. So you've completely... You're not sure if she's actually corrupted or if she's just sort of pretending at this point. Again, I can't praise the set design and that fantasy gothic feel enough. The film really... It's one of these movies that, although not perfect, it really does create its own world in itself, and I think that's what the part of the appeal is with Legend. Aside from Tim Curry and the makeup of Darkness and his performance, but you really do get, like I say, involved with this world. And like I say, the set designs are so lavish, and they all play their part really well. I say really awesome. So can't praise the set design enough. The film, I say, really in its own world. Lily cuts the unicorn free. They let light in via the aid of their make-do reflectors they've assembled. Darkness goes into the void after a showdown, and it's so awesome though how they make Darkness. They make him look massive, right? They make Darkness look absolutely massive. But as I say, if you want your Tim Curry Darkness action, you only really need to watch the last 20 minutes because he's sort of teased up to that point. But as I say, especially at the end is when it's sort of you do see him in his full glory. He's a hulking, devilish creature, right? We then go back to the start of the movie where Jack dives into the water to find the ring, which I think it's still actually, I don't know, I think it's the same scene. I could be wrong, but anyway. So back in the forest, he kisses the princess. She wakes up, free of the spell she was under. He tells her he loves her. They run off together. The unicorns are back, and Gumpty's friends sort of waves him. And that's sort of the end of the movie. As I say, this is the European cut, but it's amazing how quickly the film is right, all back to normal. Right, now that's the end. We're back to normal. We've done our mission. It's all done. But very different, as I say, from movies like Labyrinth, like Dark Crystal, though, was quite dark. But if you think along the lines of films like Never-Ending Story and Labyrinth, as I mentioned, very, very different. A lot darker tonally, as I say, very, very darker, but still has a great, as I say, lavish set design. And you do really get involved with this world. And what's interesting, as I mentioned, it's a kids' fantasy film that is actually shot very, very, very seriously. Right, there's no sort of, okay, let's entertain the kids, let's have some really obvious comic relief for the kids or anything like that. But it's one of them movies you can fully understand, you can fully understand why it has such a huge cult following. It is one of them movies, and it's worth watching alone for Tim Curry's awesome performance as Dark. It's worth watching just for that villain alone, because as I say, highly regarded and ranked as sort of one of the most synonymous sort of main villains that you will ever see, not just in kids fantasy movies, but I think just in films in general. I think, like I say, Tim Curry in this just absolutely steals the show. But as I say, the costume design and also just watch it for Tom Cruise playing a forest child, that's another reason to go check it out. But let me know if you've seen Legend. What are your thoughts on it? Do you love it? Do you think it's deserving of its cult status, or do you think it is just a load of rubbish that you've got no time for? But make sure to let me know. But I think it's one of them films that, like I mentioned, even as a kid, even before I'd seen it, it felt weird. When I watched it for the first time, I always remember vaguely it felt like I'd seen it. But I think that's sort of where, if you read fairy tales as a kid and you sort of watch this, it's sort of they all become part of the same thing, if that makes sense. Or maybe I'm just talking a load of nonsense. But thank you very much indeed for watching. I hope you enjoyed the review, and I'll see you again soon.
Don't concentrate on the finger, or you will miss all that heavenly glory.